What happens when the call you've given your life to ends with a sentence that you never expected to hear? You're done here. Today's episode sits in that hallway, locked out of the room, no cause given, 9 days before Christmas. You know, for many ministry families, that moment is not a headline. It's the rent, the food, the school pickup, and the sudden silence of friends who won't text back. My name's Matt Davis, and you're listening to the Life After Ministry podcast. My co-host today is my wife, Marilee Davis, and our guest is Kristen Joy Humiston. Kristen grew up as a pastor's kid, married a pastor, and built a life around the church. And then came the meeting that she was not allowed to enter, the changed locks, the unanswered calls, and the question every ministry spouse eventually faces in some form. How do I breathe now? We're going to talk about the cruelty of poor process and the loneliness of being a pastor's wife, and the way that trauma can take root when you have no voice, no choice, and no people around you. We also talk about recovery, practical steps on day one, where the money comes from when it doesn't, and how do you protect your kids when adults fail them. And there is hope. There are surprising ways that God meets us when we leave a building, but we refuse to leave love. If you're a leader, a board member, or a spouse carrying quiet dread, this conversation will give language for what you're feeling and a path forward. Let's begin. Well, hey friends, welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast. I'm joined not just by one person today, but by two. And so I'm very excited to welcome back my wife, Marilee. Marilee, so glad to have you here.
Hello. Good to be back. It's been a minute.
Just a minute. And so schedules and coordination and all the things. But this is an important conversation and definitely wanted you here because we're also joined by Kristen Joy Humiston. Kristen, very good to have you here.
It's great to be here. I am excited for this conversation as well.
Yeah, we love talking about really hard, difficult, heavy things. And so it's just kind of how we're wired over here, right? What were you going to say, Marilee?
No, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what we do here. Well, Kristen, give us a little bit of background. You come from ministry. Not sure what that means. So give us an example of what that, tell us your ministry experience.
Sure. I grew up as a pastor's kid. My mom went into labor with me, playing piano on a Sunday night, and I was back in church the next Sunday, right? And so I've lived all of that, all of life as a pastor's kid, and went to a Christian college, married a man who was already a pastor at that time, graduated from senior year and went into full-time ministry within 2 weeks, hit the ground running. And so all of my life up until it wasn't, was the pastor ministry lens. I really didn't have another view. So that comes into play a lot for how I processed what our transition looked like.
So you found your way into ministry. You grew up in it. You were marinated in it, is what I normally say. That was a little bit of my experience, but it didn't stay that way. Tell us about the exit. And was that something that you guys chose? Were you pulled out? Were you pushed out? How did that happen?
Yeah. So we experienced a forced termination that really ended in a very abrupt way. It was a phone call on a Saturday morning, 9 days before Christmas. And, hey, we want you to come in. And I could tell by the tone of it. We also lived in a place very flat. We could see across the mile between us and the church. And we knew that there were some vehicles there where we were like, what is going on? And so I said, I want to come too. Ask if I can come too, which he did. And they said no. And he hung up the phone and I said, I'm going anyway, especially because they don't want me there. Something is up. And so I went and they greeted us at the door very seriously, walked us back to where the boardroom was, rural church, but about 300 people. longstanding in the community.
Did you have any sense? Was there anything going wrong? Was there frustration or heads butting before this moment? Or how surprised were you guys even walking into some kind of situation? Was there a sixth sense happening there?
Yeah, well, definitely a sixth sense. What he had been hired on 2.5 years prior to take the role of senior pastor after the senior pastor retired. As a pastor's kid, even at that time, my dad was kind of in that same era in his life and ministry. And we had seen him announce a retirement and then pull it back and announce a retirement and pull it back. And we had seen how that had impacted his church. And so in the hiring process, one of the conversations my husband and I had, and then eventually asked them for, was, hey, can we just get a clause written in the contract that just acknowledges this is the plan to at some point retire within the next 2 to 5 years and then transition for Jason, is my husband's name, to become senior pastor. At which point they, even in the hiring process, said, no, we can't put that in writing. That was a piece of, a little contention in my marriage, because I said, honey, I don't feel good about this. And the phrase again and again, well, God will provide. God will provide.
Was the first little red flag there, maybe?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I, at that point, was not doing well. We had I think 5 kids when we moved there. And we had kind of a gap. Anyway, we were at 5 kids, not like right at 10 years. So I was under all of that. I was homeschooling, all of the pressures of that. We were away from any kind of family or help. We, for all intents and purposes, were very much kind of trying to just do life all on our own as a family. And so I had really I was burnt out. And I remember saying, because the church that we were hired onto, I was friends with some people that were there already. And I remember saying to one of them, what happens if I just can't do this? Like, if I'm not doing well and I'm just concerned, what if I emotionally end up just kind of falling apart? And she said, oh, we're going to be there to love you through it. It'll be fine. We'll walk with you. So as the pressures mounted, and, there's always ups and downs in ministry. And my husband is a forever optimistic guy. And so there were things along the way that were red flags, and we would have conversations about them, but then everything would be fine and smooth out and be good. And then the senior pastor announced his retirement, and people started asking, okay, great. So now we're going to begin moving towards installing Jason as senior pastor. And they started kind of backpedaling. Oh, well, we need to form a search committee, and we have to go through that formally just to formalize it. And then the people on the search committee, which told us later, in that very first meeting of the search committee, 4 months before the senior pastor had his last Sunday, they had said, well, let's just take some other resumes, just see what else is out there. And so those that we knew on the search committee, which mentioned this much later, they knew, hey, something here is not up. So my clue as to things that weren't really going well is I was on the women's ministry team, of course, doing some leadership roles in that. And suddenly the women that were on that team with me, leadership team, they stopped answering my texts. They would turn their head away from me when I would walk by them at church. They wouldn't take my children when I went to drop them off at nursery. It was, and I kept saying to my husband, I don't understand, and I don't know what I've done wrong. October 7th, maybe, it's in my journal, I write just the only words on the page, God, whatever you have to do, get us out of here. But I never would have imagined that it would have been in the way that happened.
Sounds like you were experiencing so much rejection even before the actual rejection and termination or whatever.
Yeah. And my husband, I would share that with him, again, that kind of ever optimistic, well, once I get in and we can do this or that, I'm sure it'll be fine. To which in the years since, he has come back and said, man, I really missed it and I'm sorry.
Mm.
So
you get escorted back and there's cars in the parking lot, there's people in the building and you guys are there. And what's the news that you guys hear?
Yeah, they take my husband into a room and I could only see a little bit into it. I could see enough that there were so many people in the room. Some were not current leadership members, but they were there and there was a singular, metal chair, the ones all the churches have, in the middle. And the man that had let us down the hallway put his arm out so I could not enter the room with my husband. And he shut the door. I sat down on stairs outside of that room and I just heard, "You're done here. You can pack your bags. We're changing the locks and you can make an appointment on Monday with a secretary to get your things."
Was there a cause given?
No, there was no cause given. There were some things that had happened. They used an incident, kind of a straw that broke the camel's back, that is connected with extra things in our extended family that had been going on. And so there had been a moment where my husband, who is known in that community as keeping his cool in really high stress moments, where he had come home and said, "I don't know, maybe I just did something that's going to make me lose my job." And I wasn't there to see it, but he had said, "I did kind of lose my cool." And it was an email from a woman to the board that said, "Oh, I can't go to church with a pastor." I've read the email. "I can't go to church with a pastor who's going to yell." And at that point, that was the first time my husband that I ever knew of had ever yelled. He had never yelled at home. I had never heard him yell at anybody. There's one other time after we were terminated that I remember him yelling, and that's it. There's 2 times in his life that I can recall him ever yelling. So it was out of character. But, looking back, I know you've had Kaylee, and I'm forgetting her last name, with Restory on. There's the generational trauma piece that happens in a church. And so we see things in a very different perspective in terms of what was actually happening. But at that moment, it was very personal rejection. And that particular email came from somebody who I had taught their kids violin and piano. We had gone to their home, for meals and cookouts and all of those types of things. So the betrayal in that feels really personal and deep in the moment.
We call that day 0, right? Day 0 is that last day. It's the termination moment. And what we like to key in on is, how do you recover from that? But we have to first understand the fallout and the damage that was done, right? If that is, boom, the bomb that hits, what's the impact on that? And so there's different stakeholders. There's the church and the church volunteers, the remaining staff and all that. But we get to hear this from your perspective, and your perspective is as the pastor's wife. And, we, on this podcast, we talk to a lot of leaders, the pastors, the ministry leaders who've come out. But we particularly want to hear this through your view and what that's like to be in there. And there's a million reasons why a pastor will come out of ministry, transition, be terminated. It could be a moral failure, whatever those pieces are. But I can feel as I'm listening to you, the air kind of being taken out of your lungs in that moment, and the helplessness of being in the hallway, the hand coming and you can't come, and your poor husband and Mama Bear wants to get in there and protect. And oftentimes, what we feel a lot more of the anger coming from the spouse before we ever hear it coming from the person who actually was just let go. They almost want to protect their spouse in that moment. What did that feel like?
Yeah, there's no English words adequate to describe it. We are at this point 7.5 years out, and I've shared my story many, many, many times over. I rarely become emotional about it anymore. But when I think of that moment, I still become emotional. It is that pure helplessness and terrifying. Already my head was, what are we going to do? How are we going to live? For our case, and as is the case for many who are at least single income homes, there was no other income. There was no savings. At that point, we had 6 children. Our youngest was 2 and our oldest was 14 at that time. How are we going to do Christmas? It was 9 days before Christmas. How do you fire somebody? How do you fire somebody 9 days before Christmas in the church?
The word that keeps coming to mind is cruel. Like there's a cruelty to the way that was handled. It's not,
Yes.
It's like the worst possible way, the worst possible timing. There's something, I'm going to say it's evil, not because the people doing it are evil, but because there's an evil undertone to the treatment of you, the treatment of your family in that season. It makes my blood boil, actually.
Yeah.
Listening to you.
And when in working with other women who have gone through this, that evil undertone is absolutely what it is. And we won't go into those pieces, but that piece of how could this happen? How could you treat me like this when you've broken bread with me? When 4 days ago, you patted my husband on the back, smiled to his face and said, "Hey, good job. Loved what you had to say for sermon today." The utter double-facedness of what went on. We ended up on day 0, and we're heading home, not even 5 minutes later, and passing one of the leaders' homes. And, the only thing I'm thinking is, I'm just going to go set that house on fire. Later, it became tomatoes. But for a long time, it was, I'm going to set that house on fire. And we were living in, for all intents and purposes, a parsonage. So we didn't own our own home. I had no idea, what does this mean? Are we out December 31st? Where are we going to go? I called our best friend from seminary, and we were quite a few years out from seminary at that point, but she just said, come, we have room for you guys. It doesn't even matter. We don't have to decide details. You just come, you can stay as long as you need. And I, looking back at it, thought like, wow, that was Christmas week, which is a really high, busy time for ministry leaders typically. And so just the generosity to be able to have some place that was safe enough. In the midst, we hadn't been home 20 minutes and I'm on the phone with the principal of the school withdrawing my oldest. He was in class with the daughter of the woman who wrote an email. And I just knew, like, if he had to go back into class, we're going to have issues there. So that was part of the mama bear, pulling him out right away. And then we were over at our friend's house within about 4 hours.
What is it like? I'm curious, was your husband stunned? Did he feel the same betrayal and anger? Or was he trying to, as was his custom a little bit in the background, right? It's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. Don't get upset at them. Don't set that house on fire. Let's go get some tomatoes, right? Like, what's he experiencing there? And how do you guys, what's that like for the marriage in the moment?
Silence. Silence. He did say something back to me in the car. I don't remember what it was. I remember him responding. And I don't remember what he said at all for the next. I don't even remember what he ever said at our friend's house. That is likely my trauma that just so much narrows the focus of what your brain can even comprehend. There's that shock value that's going on. And he does tend to go towards silence, so he was a lot silent. And we still, last night, had a conversation about what was some of that really like? Like, what was the biggest part of the pain for you? And there's not a lot of words still for him to be able to articulate that really well.
I have a question for you, and maybe this is pushing us a couple of steps forward. So ultimately, this terrible termination has led to a ministry, and you're working with women who are coming out of ministry. Their husbands have been taken out for whatever reason. And I thought of something when you were talking, and I'm curious if you can speak to this, if this is a common theme that you hear. So as I was listening to you, I was hearing that you did have some intuition, that like there were red flags along the way that were like pricking at your intuition to let you know, like something's not quite right here. This makes me uncomfortable. But I think, and I would say that this is true in our situation, that, I think our husbands, as the pastors or they're in ministry, they drink the Kool-Aid to some degree, because this is their livelihood. This is their community. This is their flock. And I think looking back over our experience as a woman, I think we sometimes tend to have a different intuition. I don't want to say more to intuition, because I think it just looks different between men and women. But I'm curious, looking back at my experience, I had intuition and I had some insight into particular leaders and some of the way that things were done that maybe could have been perceived as some red flags before everything went down. And I'm curious if you hear that often from women that you work with now. Like, did sometimes these women have a sense that something wasn't quite right? And I think that contributes to the trauma, because sometimes we may even voice like, something doesn't feel right here. I'm worried about this. And it becomes spiritualized. Like, no, it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to keep pushing forward. But there's almost like our voices sometimes are shut down, not intentionally. I don't think with bad intention. It's just sort of the nature of maybe the beast of ministry sometimes. But I'm curious if you hear other women also saying, like, I had a feeling, like I knew something wasn't right. But so there's like a sense of, I'm trying to like figure out what I'm trying to say. There's a notion that something's off. And then when this thing happens and it goes down poorly, or we find that we were right about some of the feelings we had, it's been like minimalized the whole time. And I think it contributes to the like, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. It contributes to how the couple processes and moves forward. And it ranges. I do hear that piece. For some women, that's the piece. For some women, it is really just very strongly on the abandonment piece from the church and from God. How can I trust God? Where was he? That is sometimes more of the highlight piece for them. And the other piece just being, we can't quite figure out how to, like, he wants to continue being in ministry and I really don't, but okay, I need to continue supporting him. That's very much strong. So like, how can I get over this pain so that I can stay in church with him? Those tend to be some of the larger common
threads,
highlights. Mm-hmm.
In all of the fallout coming after, and right, so like you're coming up against Christmas. Where are we going to live? What's our job? You didn't have deep roots there. You're not around family. We've worked with some folks that like moved their entire family cross country, bought a house, got the new job, didn't have anybody around there, and a year later they were said like, you no longer have a job here. And now we just moved in this community. The market has changed. We can't sell our house right now, and we're backwards. We work with people who find out when they lose their job in ministry, most of the time they don't have unemployment insurance. A lot of times the board doesn't even know there's unemployment. So there's really zero safety net. And, a lot of times it's a 2-week severance check and say, good luck, bless you as you go. How did you guys, like, as a family, like what are those next steps? What is day one and day two and week one and month one? Like what does that process look like? How do you find your footing again?
Yeah. Day one, how do we breathe? And in the housing piece, again, for us, we didn't have a house that was our own. And my husband kept saying, this is one thing that I remember him saying very clearly again and again, I can't breathe in this house. I can't breathe in this house. So the 4 days that we spent at our friend's house was a gift to be able to physically breathe. And we knew we needed to go back. We didn't know what we were going to do for Christmas now. And on the way back, our transmission went out on our family vehicle. We only had one. We had one little runaround one, but on our Suburban, 9:00 at night, Indianapolis, rain pouring down, freezing cold. And who do we even call? Because nobody's talking to us. And every single man on that leadership board had vote. It was a unanimous vote to have him out. And so who do we call? And we called one individual who we knew had a Suburban and were the most we could guess still okay with us. And my husband rode back for an hour to our home with the tow truck driver. And I rode with this man who, this was my thought, I'm riding with the enemy. And the only words that were exchanged in that, I said, you could have voted no. He said, I didn't know what else to do. And I knew there wasn't going to be anything here really for you guys. You could have just voted no, to at least know that one person was standing up for us. So I say that because what do you do? We started searching for job. That's where he put all his energy. I just started packing. It's also something ministry families generally are pretty adept at, is packing. So I started doing what I knew to do because I knew at some point we'd have to go. They gave us 6 weeks severance pay and did tell us, you can stay in the house until end of the school year. That wasn't helpful when my husband again and again, I can't breathe here. I can't breathe here. And it's so close to the church. We could watch everything going on there. So reaching out to family, who will take us? Nobody really wanted to. My parents did end up taking us. And so we moved into their basement 6 weeks later. And my brother got my husband a job at a local factory. The piece of like, how are we gonna keep food in our kids' mouth is very real reality for many that experience this. I like Dr. Tanner, Matthew Tanner, in Wounded Pastor book, talks about the high-risk profession. And that's really language that needs to come to this profession overall, because what did we believe? And I'm not saying this is necessarily wrong, but God will provide. God will provide. And so we didn't look at our career, at that career, as high risk. And we didn't have things in place that maybe we would have or could have if we had been looking at it differently way back years before.
Yeah. I'm curious, a bit of our own story. I was the one that I needed to get out. When my moral failure came out, I wanted to hold on to the job, but really I was trying to hold on to dignity and did not want shame was chasing me down. Right. And so
shame was Marilee over.
Yeah. And Marilee said, no, you need to be done. Like, you need to be out. And in the fog of all of that, I was thinking, this is something that's happening to me. The church was seeing that this was something that was happening to them. And, part of our arrangement was that the board wanted us to continue to attend the church. And what I think the good intention of wanting healing to happen within the community there. And we would go in a few minutes late into the service, surrounded by a few friends that were still with us as like a Roman phalanx, and walked us in. And I remember turning around one time and Marilee being, 10, 20 feet behind me. And I had all of these people around me and there was nobody around her. And Marilee, later you would tell me, this is about the sun, moon, and stars, but how was that experience for you? Because I was a mess, right? So I understand that. I was thinking it was happening to me. The church was thinking it was happening to them, but what was happening for you?
Well, I think a couple of things like stood out. Like, yes, that Sunday was pivotal when I realized like, oh my gosh, everyone is rallied around you. And not that I didn't want you to receive love, because the community loved him and I knew they missed him and I knew they were worried. But I think that the general sense, probably more from like the leadership of the church, is that this moral failing had happened to them. Like, it hadn't first happened in our family and to me and to our kids. Like, the epicenter was the ministry, not the family. And I think tangibly how that felt was the church leadership did not reach out to me until about 3 weeks after everything like exploded. Like, not one phone call, not one text, not a like, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? Like, the whole thing was all about, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to handle this situation? You know? And so I think that like my realization, how I described it to Matt, was like, he was the sun in this situation, like, and the church and the leadership and everyone was orbiting around him. And I soon felt like my role was sort of like to reflect his glory. And when he wasn't glorious anymore, when this thing had happened, it was like, I was just a dark rock, you know, floating around. And not that, and I'm not saying that like it needed to be about me, and it wasn't about me, but also like there was a tenderness and a care, I think, that was lacking from the leadership. And there were a few individuals, absolutely, who met me right where I was. And I'm so grateful for those people. But if we're talking about sort of the institution or the body, gosh, it was so hard. You know, it was really hard.
Can I ask both of you then? So what would have made the experience better? Because what we're trying to do with ministry transitions, we're not taking hard things and making them easy, right? This is letting somebody go. Like, we are not anti-firing. Sometimes people need to be let go, but we want to do it better. We're not making hard things easy. We're making hard things palpable. We're making hard things better. But like, so I want to start like, Kristen, what would have helped this process? Because anytime you're fired, that's a hurtful, it's a personal, it's a thing. And there's mourning. Like, there's nobody who gets fired and says like, oh, that was really great. I loved it. I want to do that again. But what could have been done that would have mitigated hurt damages for you?
Trauma happens when you have no voice, no choice. You're utterly alone, and there has been tremendous fear or terror. And so to mitigate that would have been what you experienced. In a sense, one of the things you, Matt, experienced was support, people coming around you. You still felt seen. What Marilee experienced was, wait, I'm here too? No one called us. The only person who called us was someone from the community who said, whoa, what happened? You're the last person I would have thought this would have happened to. What did you do? Yelled one time? I don't know, like, I don't know. What did we do? So mitigating the traumatic impact is absolutely possible. I'm with you, Matt. Sometimes pastors are not a great fit. Sometimes there's been a moral failure. We need to address that. Yes, pastors don't get a pass on, just always retaining their job. The way it's done absolutely can be done in a fashion that is supportive, caring, demonstrates the characteristics of God's heart. When that's lacking, that's the piece that makes it so traumatic and impacts the spiritual dynamic too. For, okay, well, if this is the body of Christ, then maybe I don't want anything to do with it.
Marilee, can I ask you, what would have changed?
Well, I think I would point out probably one thing that's different, like Kristen, between your situation and our situation is it sounds like you guys really had no one. Just the nature of where the church was located and the people that were your closest friends were also the leadership of the church. And like, you guys really were rejected by everyone. I think the thing that saved me and saved us was we did have a community of friends who had already walked with us in some hard things and like understood what we would have needed. And so even though we weren't getting that response from like the church leadership, which was disappointing and eye-opening, we did have it from a few people. And I always remember hearing, I can't remember who said it, but trauma gets laid down in the brain if you're going through something alone, like what you said. So the same thing could happen to me and happen to you, the exact same thing. But if I have support and there's some people to help me process it and digest it and go through it, it's not going to lay down on my brain and impact me long term the way it is if you are left alone just to figure this out on your own, which it sounds like is exactly what happened to you guys. And so, I think in our situation, would it have been nice if the leadership had had more awareness of how this impacted the whole family? Yes. But we got what we needed from people outside of that, if that makes sense. So Matt, I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel to some degree we did get what we needed. It was just from other people. It wasn't from the leadership of the church itself.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that it meant that they didn't care or didn't consider the family impact, but it was never verbalized. And I think that would, or it was verbalized much later, and that probably would have helped.
In retrospect. Yeah. Yeah.
Kristen, you're trying to do something to help. You're trying to take the painful piece of your journey and your story and to be able to come alongside, in particular, the wives. And that's the lens that you have. And I'm excited about what you're doing because we not only talk to the people who lost their positions, but we talk to the spouses too. Can you give us a little bit of insight on what that looks like?
Sure. It has been my heart because of this piece that there are some and growing resources for the men, however that looks in their ministry role. And this piece of women and the children is often a very side piece. And the women typically, because of our culture, all of those pieces, are the ones that are also navigating then the school changes. Clubs that kids have to come out of if there's a move, or how to go to the grocery store. And again, stories of, oh my goodness, I heard this person's voice and I had to hide in a grocery store aisle. I just knew, behind clothes racks in retail stores. This is an ongoing challenge. How do I live in the community and go about doing the things for my children and for myself? Doctor's appointments, I have to find a new doctor. I have to navigate all of those things. So many different pieces in there to navigate. And often the woman is doing that in lieu of her own healing because it's the immediate need. So that's one piece, that coming alongside women, helping them to have language even and to acknowledge, because there's a lot of traumatic pieces in that, a lot of grief pieces in that. And so some of the work that I do in addition to coaching is leading groups, support groups for women. Beyond Forced Termination is the group that I lead specific for this topic and for women impacted by this. And the reason I do that, sometimes we talk about the healing that's needed may be one-to-one at first, like finding a therapist or a spiritual director, one person to work with you. And there are places and times for that. Obviously, I'm a big fan of that. But the group aspect is meeting this need for the woman to see that she is not alone, to have conversations about what that is like to navigate the piece with children. And let's be real, forced terminations or ministry transitions of whatever kind don't happen in a vacuum. So often the woman is also navigating either kind of the sandwich generation, dealing with elderly parents as well as, or graduating children, going off into college. So difficult when this is happening. And now who do we invite to the graduation party? We, several people navigating that I can think off the top of my head. I'm sure many, many more. Having a baby, being pregnant when this happens, and then now I don't have a baby shower. Who's going to celebrate my baby? Mm-hmm. Everything is impacted for the woman and children in this world when so often there are, again, some mitigating factors that can be helpful if there's outside job, additional income, things like this, support, like we've talked about. But doing that work to come alongside her and help her receive some language, some sense of, you get me, and that piece of, I can be with some women who I can learn to trust. When we have this piece of trust that's been so impacted by betrayal, the healing portion of that is having a consistent, patterned, repeated experience of safe enough community or safe enough individual. And so by having a group, this is part of what we're healing, is actually in her body and brain, coming on a weekly basis to a place she knows she can attend to this wound with people who get her and won't judge her, won't give her the platitudes that she hears everywhere else. So it's a joy, absolute joy, to be able to provide that. And the sense of relief that I see in everyone's bodies, even through Zoom, of like, oh, when people are talking and sharing some of their experiences within the group or answering questions, is so palpable. It's just tremendous healing that is found in the support group aspect.
I would have loved to have been a part of that. Like, loved it in that season of life, for sure. I think it would have been so life-giving. And I think being a pastor's wife in general tends to be a little lonely, because you're like part of the community, but you're also like weirdly like elevated in the community, and you can't always be fully real with people because there's this like reputation, that you have to uphold. I don't know. I just think in general, it's kind of a lonely place to be. And then just add that times 8,000 when something like this happens, where all of a sudden it's like, now I'm completely isolated,
Yeah. Yep.
Well, and life after ministry, and being married to somebody who's coming out of that is not the easiest thing. And really one of the early articles that we put up on our website, Marilee, I asked you to put up, and it was, I think the title was Untangling the Fourth Strand. And so I'm going to link that as well, but give us just the quick pitch on what you were doing and what were you untangling in that season for us.
Are you asking me? Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you.
Well, I think, one thing that you become aware of when you step out of ministry is how much of ministry is entangled in your life. And I think our big realization, and Matt's big realization, was how much of his identity was wrapped up in being in ministry. And so when that strand was pulled out, it sort of unraveled all the other ones. And for him, it was his journey of trying to figure out, like, who am I if I'm not a pastor? And then as the spouse of that person kind of trying to figure out who they are, it really like shakes the entire fabric of not only him as like a man and who he was, but the dynamics of our relationship and our marriage. And now we're trying to figure out the dynamics of how we do life without this strand in there that really was like a thick strand, And so there was a lot of learning and a lot of reshaping and reweaving that the Lord had to do in that season, both in Matt as a man, and then in our marriage, and then as our family, as you try to figure out, okay, what do things look like from this point forward if this isn't in our life anymore? It was very disorienting. I think that's the best word. Very big season of disorientation, having that strand pulled out.
Marilee, the identity piece is really big for many pastors' wives. Who am I if I'm not a pastor's wife? What do I do with myself? And how that impacts practical schedules, because she comes to know herself as the Bible study leader or worship team director or whatever it is, maybe in addition. I'm curious if you had any piece of this identity that you found yourself kind of navigating and untangling as well.
Not too much, but I think that it's because of the nature of the church we were in. It was a large church. I think it would have been very different maybe if Matt was the senior pastor and there was that dynamic, or if it was a smaller church. But because it was big and because there were many of us, I do feel in that way that I did feel less pressure in that sense. So yeah. And I think between the two of us and the relationship, I was always maybe more likely to have one foot out the door at any point anyways. And so it was, I mean, So I think that, I think I was not as like entrenched maybe as other people might have been, just because of the circumstances and the nature of our church.
Yeah. Thanks.
Kristen, how do people get in touch with you?
They can find me at theministrywifecoach.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram primarily. I do have a therapy website, which is where you can find information about the Focus Care retreats. And the therapy website is courageoushealingtherapy.com. So not to confuse listeners, but two places to find information, I suppose.
Good. And we'll put all that in the notes and make sure that people connect. You should be one of the busiest people on earth. And so, because the need is there, we know the need is there. It's just connecting the need to the resource. And so we want to be able to do that. Let's close with this. Is there life after ministry for the Humiston family? Is your husband still amongst the living? Is he in ministry? Is he not in ministry? How are things? How did this story turn out?
Yeah. Well, we're always in the middle of the story, right? So this piece right now, he is still working for that company. He has, I guess we'd say, moved up in the ranks, and he's working as a corporate trainer. And so using some of his strengths that he liked using in ministry in the corporate world. And last night he said, I wouldn't go back. And I have found that I can use my strengths that God has given me and still provide ministry to people, to point them to Jesus and to lift up who they are. He was very good at doing that in ministry, lifting up who the other person was, developing their strengths. And so he's enjoying doing that in a different role. That's where he's at. There is life after ministry. It looks very different than you may imagine. And it is still good, even if it looks different.
Good.
Here.
Yeah. Kristen, it's so good to have you here. Thank you for sharing your story. There's parts of it that kind of pull up some of the old and, this hurts a little bit. And then there's also stuff that I pray that kind of gets put back into place, and you can realize, like, thank God we're not bleeding and the blood's not splattering everywhere. The wound is not open anymore. But you can see the scar and you can know that there's healing, and that's the beauty of it. And that happens through great community and through the Lord coming and meeting us in those moments of pain. And so wherever you're at, if you're in ministry, if you're coming out of ministry, if you are afraid that this one day might happen to you, even some of you ministry wives that are looking and saying, like, I don't know about this situation. Like maybe you as a couple, you need to like sit down and like, we really need to talk about this, and let's really be intentional about this. Good communication. And for everything else in between, we'd love to talk with you, whether it's ministry transitions or we push you to Kristen because you have a ministry, you're part of the ministry that we the Ministry Transitions is a bunch of dudes. And so we need people like you that we partner. So we link arms with you and we send everybody, if you are in that spot, we want to be able to send them your way. And so thank you for the restorative, redemptive work that you're doing.
I have one more question that just came to me. You had mentioned earlier that, that there was a book that you read and it talked about being a pastor being what was the phrase? It was like a risky job,
high-risk profession.
High-risk profession. And you had said that you wished that you had known then to look at this profession through that lens. And there were some things that you would have done or some preparations that you would have made differently. And I was wondering if you could speak to people that are listening. Maybe they're in a great season and everything is good at their church, but because it is a high-risk profession, do you have any tips or tricks for anyone listening or recommendations of like, what would you do? What's a conversation people need to have just to lay a foundation of being prepared in case something like this were to happen to them?
Yeah, I think this really hits at the financial aspect in ministry. And there were decisions that were made, I'll say, by us as a couple, that, we knew going into, like, for example, this particular church, it was not going to meet our budget needs. And we took it because God will provide. And so to pay attention to realistic needs and be okay with saying no. Just because someone offers you a job doesn't mean you have to take it. And whatever job you're at currently, to be doing your best to setting yourself up with in a financially wise way. We worked very hard. I worked many jobs, but we made decisions that were not meeting the needs that we really had. Not the extravagant wants, but the needs. And I wish we would have done that differently.
Yeah. And that book is by our friend, Dr. Matthew Tanner, the Wounded Pastor. And he has a podcast coming out. Hope is too for you, Kristen, that maybe there's a podcast coming out in your future. So good stuff ahead, healing ahead. Kristen, thanks for coming on Life After Ministry podcast. Bless you. Some moments never fully leave us. You can heal and the bleeding can stop, but there's still a scar that tells the truth. And Kristen reminded us today that ministry is a high-risk profession, not because God is cruel, but because people are complex and systems are often unprepared. So what reduces damage is not spin or speed, it's dignity. To give people voice, to give them choice, and don't let them stand alone in the midst of it. So if you're a pastor's spouse who feels that tightening in your chest when the phone rings, you're not crazy. Pay attention to what God is speaking to you. Invite a trusted friend into the room where your fears live. And if you're a board member, if you're a leader in the church or a ministry, then do the hard work before the hard day. Build policy, even though it's not glamorous. Budget for severance that honors a family and offer care that includes the spouse and the kids, not as an afterthought, but as a first call. And when termination becomes necessary, do it in a way that you would want it done to you. Sounds kind of familiar. Kristen showed us something hopeful. There is life after ministry. It may look different. It may involve a factory job before a new calling emerges. It might be smaller and quieter and slower than the platform you left. But good still finds you. And provision still comes, and purpose is not owned by a paycheck from a church. 2 invitations as we close. First, if you are facing an upcoming transition, termination, or succession, and you want a confidential, steady guide, I encourage you, just visit our website, ministrytransitions.com. You can also donate to support a leader who is in crisis, and you don't even have to find that leader, they come to us. And if you are that leader, then book a private call, and we can help you make a wise plan. Second, explore today's show notes for links to Kristen's work with ministry wives, group support, and retreats. If you are a woman who is recovering from a forced termination, don't heal by yourself. Do it in community. We are grateful that you've trusted us with your time. Keep choosing love over blame. Keep choosing people over platforms. We'll see you next time on the Life After Ministry podcast.